Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. We are alive and well. I'm really excited for today's conversation. Today we're speaking with Barbara Rosenwein. She is a world-renowned historian and one of the founding figures of the history of emotions as a scholarly discipline. With a focus on medieval history, she has radically reshaped how scholars understand the emotional lives of past societies. Her work introduces the idea that emotions are not universal constraints, but historically and culturally shaped, and her concept of emotional communities has become a foundational tool in historical and interdisciplinary studies of feelings. Over the past 10 years, her work has expanded all the way from the Middle Ages. In Generations of Feelings in 2016, she explored the many emotional communities of the period between 600 to 1700. Then she turned to a global history of anger, and most recently to the feelings and experiences of old age in Winter Dreams, a historical guide to old age. In the course of writing these books, she has added to and modified her ideas about emotional communities. I'm really excited for today. How are you doing?
I'm fine, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I mean, emotions are so fascinating, and I think it's interesting because for most of my life, I think I would shun whatever experience of emotion I had. And I was like, all right, you're not supposed to feel these things. These are not things you're supposed to be feeling. Try to take it out in a different way. And I think it's only been as of late, as I've been reading some novels and I've been watching some movies, that I've been having what feeling emotions look like even modeled. And so it's been a new phase in my life where I feel like feeling my emotions rather than crucifying them has been something that's been more regular. So I'm very excited for just to learn more about emotions, especially historically. And so, I mean, first, I'd love to know a little bit more about you. How did you find yourself fascinated and interested by emotions?
Thanks for that question. Actually, I've always been the sort of student who wants to know why. Why do people do things that they do? Um, my first project was with medieval monks. They prayed almost all day. Why would they do that? What motivated them to do that? And why were they so prestigious to others while they were doing that? I asked myself, why? And the question did lead eventually to the topic of feelings, experiences. How does it feel to pray for a whole day? How does it feel to support people who do such things? Where is the pleasure? Where is the pain? Where is the pleasure in the pain and the pain in the pleasure? And so I started to look at what had been done so far in the history of emotions because the monks I had been starting with belonged to the 10th and 11th centuries, hardly our own era. And it was not possible to believe that our emotions today were exactly theirs. So many different cultural assumptions belonged to their world that it made no sense to just impose our emotions, especially since our emotions are dominated by English words. And I wasn't dealing with anything in English. Nobody was speaking English. Well, there was old English, but that didn't sound or have much to do with the modern English. Uh, my sources were basically in Latin. And so I began to think about how to elaborate a methodology to deal with emotions of the past. And that was not very easy because most emotions researchers are quite presentist. They think emotions are universal, they don't change, they are built in by evolution, and that evolution now, basically, with regard to the emotions, is pretty well stopped. And so there's no need to take a look at past emotions, the history of emotions. But there's no reason to think that evolution has stopped with the Stone Age, or that we no longer adapt to our own cultures. There's no reason to think that we are not creatures still of evolution and continuing evolution and adaptation. As a matter of fact, that's the whole point of evolution, isn't it? The adaptation to the environment. So I had to work out a method. Now, there was already one good method, and that was by Peter and Carol Stearns. They called it emotionology, on analogy with sociology or biology, science of emotions. But they didn't mean that it was a science of emotions so much as they meant by emotionology, quite specifically, the restraints, the categories of acceptability imposed on people's universal emotions, which changed over time. So here you see that ideals about emotional behavior and feeling changed over time, and they could chart that really by looking at works of advice columns, advice books. Take a look today in your bookstore, if there is one around, and you will see a whole section on handbooks for behavior, uh, for courtesy, for how to bring a baby, how well all these standards imply emotional standards as well. And so the Stearnses looked over a long period of time, uh, not long for a medievalist like me, but a long period of time from about the 1700s to 1940 or so, 1960 or so, looking at these advice books. Uh, and they found big changes in what was advised, different standards of emotions. Take, for example, the emotion of anger, which the Stearns studied. The emotion of anger uh, has been accepted in certain circumstances at times, has been you've been told to tamp it down, and other times different groups, women are not supposed to be angry at some times, women are supposed to be, you're supposed to be angry in the home, no, you're supposed to be angry at work. All of these emotional standards changed over time. And that's very interesting, isn't it? Especially because if your standard is don't feel that, if your standard is don't show that, don't express that, eventually you're going to try to internalize that standard and act that way and feel that way. And so one can even postulate a certain transformation in the nature of the emotion itself.
Mm. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting things that you mentioned here. One thing I want to first start with, I guess, is first defining what an emotion is, because I think from my understanding, you have a particular sensation of, and tell me if this is what you found to be the kind of process. So let's say I experience something in the world, and immediately my body produces these sensations. I feel a hunger in my stomach, or I feel my palms getting sweaty, whatever. And then my mind then understands those senses, the whatever reaction I just created, and then for me to be able to communicate or understand it, I place my language or whatever word that I know to that experience, and then I'm able to understand it myself and communicate it to others. So sadness or anger is more just a response to a sensation rather than something itself. And so when you use emotion, what does that mean?
Well, you see, what you have just expressed is one definition of what an emotion is, the one William James had, that the emotion starts with a sensation and proceeds to naming it. And that is still a very powerful paradigm for emotions, but it isn't the only theory at all. Uh, Other theories are, for example, that we have within our brain kind of um, reaction modules that pick up on certain kinds of stimuli from the outside, but with the emotion already in place, so that when someone comes at me, when someone insults me, for example, I react with the anger module, uh, or I flee because that is a fight or flight module. Um, there are other um, there are other theories, for example, that emotions are eruptions of conceptualizations that are particularly intense and cause either pleasure or pain. And these eruptions of conception may be conscious or unconscious, so that the conceptualization comes along with, you might say, your notion. First, you feel a feeling, then you apply a word to it. Well, what if the feeling itself comes wrapped in your word for it? That that conceptualization is itself endowed with a certain amount of mm, intensity and pain or pleasure. Also, it may be contradicted by other conceptualizations that are arising at the same time, because human beings, and maybe more than human beings, are conflicted creatures, uh, and have impulses and feelings that may contradict each other, or may at least be equally plausible, and at any one time we have to choose uh, which way we're going to go. So when you uh, give emotions a two-stage process, bang, feeling, sensation, second bang, naming, that's probably too simple. It is a nice conceptualization, but it is a simplification, I think, of the uh, complex processes that are going on.
Because the emotion that you're feeling also changes the experience that you're having. So it must be more of like a loop rather than just one to the two, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes.
It's hard to, it's interesting because I think also historically understanding where these emotions lie is also really interesting. Like sometimes feeling like when I'm like, okay, I'm feeling something, I often feel like it's either I think it's been more late where I'm like, oh, my brain's doing it. But for most of my life, I was like, oh, it's something near my heart that's like creating these emotions. And so it's curious. I mean, it's interesting. Like love is associated with the heart. Like it's anger might be associated with a different body part. It's so interesting how all of that works. What is kind of the history behind that?
Oh, well, that is almost an aspect of intellectual history, a history of ideas, medical thought about emotions that, for example, the Greeks thought that the anger was lower in the chest, and the Galen thought it was in the, I think he thought it was in the liver. Uh, Love has often been associated with the heart in the West, but not necessarily with the heart in other cultures. Um, uh, there is uh, today the emphasis on the brain. Uh, but in fact, the whole body is involved in producing emotions. And I think that that's important that although the I use the word conceptualization, which sounds like it's fully brain oriented. It's it's not necessary to think of emotions as residing in the brain, but rather that if they're going to become conscious, they probably become conscious through the brain. And so far, it's been useful for psychologists to do neurological studies, brain studies, MRI studies of the brain to show that when I feel anger, certain areas of my brain get more oxygenated than others. And they talk about that as being the site of anger. But of course, it isn't the site of anger, it's the site within the brain of where anger is expressed. That's different.
Can you
And
expand
when
on
I,
that difference?
yeah, sure. When I say to you, I'm angry, and I look at you with a fearful look, is my anger on my face? Some psychologists would say, yes, it is on my face. It's expressed on my face. It is on my face. Emotions are on the face. A neuropsychologist would say emotions are in the brain. When I do an fMRI of your brain, certain areas get more oxygenated than others. I can color those in, which is what I have to do in order to show which areas are more oxygenated, are more active. And I'll say that's where the anger is, right? The anger is expressed in the brain. The face is a secondary uh, issue. And then I, as a historian of emotion, might say, uh, well, a variety of things. Anger is expressed when people write, I am angry. It's expressed in words, not on the face, not in oxygen, but by words like anger or ira in Latin. Or I might say anger is a part produced by the in my stomach, in the stomach, because that's how people have conceptualized it. And the way they conceptualize it is how it feels. You see how uh, different points of view can lead to different notions of where anger resides and what we're talking about. As a historian of emotion, I would like to say anger is where you think it is. Today, we think it's in the head, so that's how we think about it. But in the past, people haven't thought about it that way. Um, and it's interesting that that is the case. I also would like to point out that there's more and more evidence that not just human beings feel emotions, but animals, certainly the higher level of animals, the apes and so on, maybe even lower orders of animals and plants.
Hmm. Because I was going to ask you that next, actually. So that, I mean, because that to me is really interesting because I think now I have recently, I don't know, enjoyed feeling emotions. I've been creating a lot, I've been painting a lot, I've been writing a lot of poetry and writing, and I feel like all of that has been motivated by some emotion or another. And so in that aspect, emotions have been really critical to the things that I've been doing, where in the past the type of living emotions actually took me away from whatever it was I was doing. So I think it's interesting because I'm curious, why do we have emotions? I mean, I think in one way it helps us guide away from danger and it helps us move towards things to reward. But why do we need such a wide variety of emotions to do that? What if we just had one that was fear that led us away from things that maybe we shouldn't do, and like another one of maybe pleasure, where it was like, all right, you did the thing you're supposed to do, you now get pleasure. We have such a varied experience of emotion. Why do you think we've evolved to be able to feel that?
Uh, Let me ask you a question preliminarily to that, and then I'll answer that. You say that you used to do things that took you away from emotions. Give me an example of a non-emotional activity that you did that you think had nothing to do with emotions.
I guess what I was trying to say is I feel like some forms of creativity, like writing poetry, for example, channels the feeling that you are like whatever it is that you're feeling and it channels it into it. The example I would maybe think of is like more routine things, like things you don't really care about, you're apathetic to. And so when you're doing something like that, if I'm feeling like sadness or if I'm feeling and I'm not able to actually channel whatever it is I'm feeling through like the work that I'm doing or the labor that I'm doing, then like feeling that actually makes it harder for me to focus on what I need to be doing. And so in that sense, the emotion, let's say something else happens to you outside of your work. In a situation like that, your emotion can't actually be channeled in the same way, I think, than if you are able to actually channel that through your art or your.
Well, I think you're very dependent on English words like sadness and anger and talking about channeling it, because I think that you probably have a whole bunch of emotions at the same time. And when you're writing poetry, you are expressing, you've chosen, you've brought to total consciousness one of those feelings, but you're not a mono emotional personality. None of us are. We have all kinds of potential for all kinds of different feelings at the same time with the same circumstances. So, when you're feeling like you're doing something routine, I'll bet that your mind is busy with all kinds of thoughts. For example, if I'm scrubbing a floor, am I thinking about scrubbing the floor? Probably I'm thinking about many other things I wish I were doing better than that, things that I am worried about. So I think that even the times when you are doing something that seems non-emotional, there probably are. You have to test this in yourself. probably are feelings going on with you, within you, that you choose not to raise to total consciousness, but are there nonetheless.
Mm,
Now, why do we have all these feelings? Because we live and have always lived, and all animals and even plants live in extraordinarily complex environments that require a lot more than aggression or regression, but rather a whole variety of openings up, closings off, moving here, moving there. Uh, and we, in order to respond most appropriately, we need all the tools we can have, maybe even new ones, and there are possibilities of new emotions arising in different circumstances. So I don't think that the question is why are there so many, really, but why have psychologists decided that there are six basic emotions, and these are called anger, happiness, sadness, disgust, and so on, rather than allowing us to see the multitude of feelings and modes of expression that we have at our disposal and that we have had in the past within our own histories, within our languages, and so on.
So would you say that the number of ways to describe particular emotions has reduced?
Yes, definitely. It has been reduced very radically by the notion of psychologists, the experimental psychologists, so they got to have something to work with, right? I mean that if they want to look at emotions, they have to have an emotion to look at. Emotional is a possibility. And there are some psychologists who are trying to work on that, who are looking at what uh, they uh, they have two axes, as it were, and they are trying to plot feelings along those axes of intensity, pleasure, and pain, and plotting these feelings without giving them the names that we give them in English. I I think since your background is from India, you probably have a whole vocabulary non-English. Is that true? To draw upon to describe your feelings,
Yeah.
or
I mean, yeah, yeah. And I think it's interesting because it also impacts the way you relate and connect to others because there's a whole other dynamic because of the language. Especially, for example, I think one of the easiest ones to say is there's a word for it, but you speak differently to those older than you and you speak differently to those younger than you. And that immediately just from the way you talk makes a different connection that is really age dependent that like causes this form of another level of intimacy that's like hidden in the language. And there's many things like that. Like there's a lot of really nice colloquial words that you can kind of attach to the words that you're saying themselves to show endearment. So it doesn't just end up as like a bro or hey brother like at the end of one or few sentences. It comes out in every sentence which causes you to feel more connected. And those are few and I don't even speak that fluently, but just from the little that I do, I've experienced those differences linguistically.
excellent. And also in Korean, you get that those sorts of things that you add on to the ends of words, and they express deference immediately, or children are something quite different, but especially words that express deference to elders. This is very, very important. Also, behaviors. And I think we can get off to some extent the notion that emotions are expressed in words, because there are some historians of emotion in particular who maintain, and I think that they are absolutely on the right track, that emotions are expressed through habitual practices, that they are generated by certain kinds of practices. So that if I have a practice of bowing to my elders, uh, it induces in me a certain form of humility that I wouldn't have if I didn't have that practice. I mean, I can name it as humility, but you don't even need to name it. Just the notion of bowing, of becoming a little bit smaller when you talk to an elder, for example. It's a very important way to express a feeling without even saying a word. I mean, you don't even need to add that uh, little, mamanji or babaji or whatever at the end of the word to mean uh, deference and humility. So
Mm.
just and gestures, if they're habitual, can express emotions.
Where, I mean, I feel like I feel like growing up as a boy and then a man, I feel like one of the things that I was told from a very young age from peers, it wasn't even really adults, it was from other 6-year-old boys, 7-year-old boys, is don't cry, like be a man. Don't whatever, be a man. And I'm so curious where that kind of ideation of emotions and connecting that to gender came from.
Yes, it's very modern, actually. It doesn't go back all that far. For example, in the Middle Ages, uh, people prided themselves, excuse me, on their gift of tears from God. And people, excuse me, and people uh, uh, felt that tears, contrition, penance, all of these things went together and showed sincerity of heart in relation to religious feeling. So that uh, boys could certainly cry in such circumstances. The notion of non non weeping masculinity. I haven't done a very uh, profound search, but it seems to me to have come from military, the modern state, and the need for new military discipline, in which you want these young soldiers to be, and the early modern state, let's say 17th, above all the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, you want them not to be sniveling while they're on the battlefield. And so, they have to shape up and they have to not show remorse or tenderness, because a soldier showing remorse or tenderness is not going to kill the enemy. So I think I think there's a lot of influence of modern military, uh, maybe also medieval military discipline, but obviously the modern army with its conscription of young kids, basically, you're not going to let them cry.
Mm.
They have to be self controlled from that, and I think kids pick it up. What kind of a man are you? What kind of a soldier are you going to be? Even though
Mm.
they may not be planning to become soldiers. Um,
Mm. I really liked what you said earlier of tears as a sign of a gift from God and sincerity of heart. I mean, it's such a, I mean, it's insane how much a small perspective shift like that. I mean, literally, I just had a friend yesterday crying and she was just like apologizing for crying, being like, I shouldn't be crying. That if you have that perspective shift of like, I am appreciative to be able to cry. I mean,
yes.
to feel this strongly about anything that I
Mhm.
care deeply enough to be able to cry. I mean, that is you won. I mean, that's the most powerful thing in the world. And it's like all it takes is a few perspective shifts to maybe like allow for spaces where crying is normal. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of it's none of those things, you know, and it's insane how much that particular there is a lot of I think even I'm in my 20s, I'm dating and it's been even just so interesting seeing how reserved and closed off people are to just feeling emotions of like trust and safety. And it's like, no, I'm not allowed to feel this. I'm not, and it's, I mean, me to including me. And it's so, I wonder where all this, I think there's so much history and perhaps it is deeply connected to to these kind of military practices, but just this, as if emotions are something negative or bad, you know?
Exactly. Well, there's a long inheritance within the West. Plato uh, was very, I wouldn't say exactly anti-emotion, but he saw emotions as getting in the way of the philosophical purposes of finding the truth, of finding virtue, of going up to the Empyrean world of ideas. Um, Aristotle is more down to earth, but then again, reading Aristotle, there's a contradiction here because reading Aristotle is very dry and seems very unemotional, even though Aristotle really thought emotions were extremely useful. Plato, who writes these dialogues, uh, actually seems to be more emotional, and you find a lot of emotions in Plato. But the doctrine, the ideology is anti emotion. That was picked up by the Christians in the West and persists until today. However, let me comment on your dating situation. There are a lot of good reasons today to be untrustful of other people. There's, we're not living in a happy time, in a time where there's a sense of community purpose and we can trust others. Very, very difficult. Trump is sending ICE against immigrants all over the United States. Uh, the who can he doesn't trust immigrants. Immigrants cannot trust him. Who can I trust? We we're living in a very difficult period of time with regard to trust. We don't really have uh, a coherent community, and that's sad. And that's really a community and an empathetic community. We're quite polarized. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're finding that it's so difficult to trust people and to show how you are feeling because perhaps something it will turn against you. For
Mm.
example, you are recording me. How do I know I'm trusting? But how do I know that you're not going to manipulate what I'm saying with AI and produce in my tone of voice something that I don't say and don't need? It it's very possible. I
Yeah.
was
I mean, you know,
yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's just so interesting you say that because recently a guest actually just brought that up for the first time. I'd never heard that before, but he was like, I stopped doing videos for everything. He just never puts any video content online for that particular fear. And a
Mhm.
very valid one. While I was like, that was the first time I thought, I was like, I have thousands of hours of myself. I think I might at this point have because I run some other things. I have probably 1,000 hours of myself talking uh on the internet. And I was like, I never even considered how easy it would be for
Yeah.
somebody to make. There is so much data on just my voice, on my inflections, on I mean it's oh my God. I mean that's a whole new world that's gonna exist in a couple years, and that is terrifying. And at
Yes.
the same time, I'm just like, I don't know. I have no idea what you're supposed to do about that.
I don't either. I don't either, except just barrel through and
Yeah.
be honest, be as honest
Yeah.
as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think, I want to talk about the concept of emotional communities because I think that is also going to be a really interesting piece of this conversation. So, what exactly is an emotional community?
Well, the idea is that rather than study a whole society, which makes us generalize so fully about, you know, this is a fearful society or this is an angry society, but individuals within it don't necessarily feel the fear or the anger. So it's a way to go from that large general conceptualization of emotions and also from the individual conception of emotions, that you have your own emotions, your own feelings, they all belong to just you, and there's no interconnect between what you're feeling and what other people are feeling. So you lie on the couch, you talk to the psychoanalyst or the psychiatrist to get in between the individual and the whole culture. I like to think about people belonging to groups that have, in general, smaller groups, social groups that agree, uh, although they don't say consciously, do you believe, or anything like that, but that agree on the emotions that are important, the emotions that we don't want ourselves to feel, the emotions that the ways in which we want to express emotions, and we do express emotions, the emotions that come up a lot in our lives where we feel comfortable with one another, even if we have somewhat different political ideas or notions of family, or even if we're of different ages, that sort of thing. If we have a certain commonality, a certain baseline of feelings that we can rely on, then we belong to that emotional community. And for the historian, it is possible then to look at all the individuals, or at least some of the individuals within that social group, and see what they've written, what they've said, if they're artists, what they've painted or sculpted, if they're musicians, what they've um, produced in the way of music, and come up with the 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 nature of that emotional community. And then you can see within any larger culture that there are more than one emotional communities. Um, and to some extent, they don't interact. To some extent, they're competitive with one another. And also sometimes they come together and blend so that at some point, you can say, this that we have new emotional communities here. Uh, there's no exact moment when we can say that, but we can see a process of transformation from one dominating emotional community to another. Just as historians have a uneasy time saying, okay, the Middle Ages ended 1400, that's when it ended, and the Renaissance began 1400. It's very hard to say that. No one woke up in 1400, Jan 1, 1400, and said, my God, the Middle Ages is over. I better put on Renaissance costume. It's just a matter of convenience for historians to periodize. And so, too, emotional communities are transformed over time. They change over time. Some come to the fore, some recede, some are lost entirely. And that's history. That's interesting. And that gives us a perspective on our own time that allows us to say, doesn't have to be the way it is now. It wasn't this way in other times, and it needn't be this way. I can think through beyond the assumptions of my own era because I have this background in the history.
Hmm. And so, can you give us a few examples of what the emotional communities we may be in would be like?
That today, you mean, or
Yeah,
or it has today?
like today.
Okay. Well, sure. There are still emotional communities within monastic groups today. There are people who join monasteries or cloisters, nunneries, and who practice a certain kind of liturgy, sing certain kinds of psalms and, well, sing the psalms and other hymns, uh, agree about the importance of community. Okay, so that's one you can find monasteries today, nunneries today. Uh, you can find uh, gay bars. There is another emotional community today with certain kinds of goals, assumptions, feelings, and the people who go to these bars can be interviewed. Why not? And see what's really important to them. But my guess is it's going to be very different, and the emotions that they emphasize different from those of the monastery. Two contemporary emotional communities.
Hmm. So, I mean, that is so interesting because I feel like sports for me also is a huge one where, I mean, playing it and watching it. I mean, I think you,
Great. That's a great example. Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And so, if you're aware of being in so these emotional communities, what I'm trying to understand is, do they encourage certain emotions over others? They have narratives around what emotions are okay, what are not. And
Yeah.
so, is that true? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and so we navigate so many emotional communities as we move through our lives. And so, I mean,
True.
I think that that's a really cool way of looking at it. I think the coolest thing for me is how subconsciously you pick up the narratives of the different emotional communities in, and then the way the crazy thing is that because the country is so I can't say this word ever, but heterogeneous. I don't know if I'm
Yes.
saying it right, but if it's just so mind blowing because you end up meeting people especially in cities like New York that are from all over the world that have navigated such varying emotional communities that you actually are speaking two different languages when you say something like I love you, or when you don't even know what that means to that person. You don't even know what that means to you. So to even understand when someone says something like that, it requires an absurd amount of understanding their context that they come from, which now with this word I'm understanding is understanding their emotional communities. Like, how did you come up with your understanding of these emotions so that when you communicate them, I understand what you're even
Yeah,
trying to tell me?
yeah, yeah. And it is always a disconnect between what I'm trying to tell you and what your understanding, because of course we have such different experiences and backgrounds and so on. But I do think, even though in our heterogeneous society we navigate between this emotional community and that one, we feel comfortable in only a few. I may go to a gay bar, but I uh, and I may even enjoy it. I have not actually been to a gay bar, so I don't know, but I kind of think I would enjoy it. But uh, I don't know that I would feel this is my emotional community. I mean, I've been married 100 years, and this is okay. That's I'm not. I like it, but it isn't mine. And I think anthropologists feel that way when they go to another culture. They love those other cultures. They love entering into those other cultures. They work hard to understand them. But, and even maybe they feel comfortable within them. But I don't know that they would say, yes, now I found my emotional community, and here is where I have my comfort zone. And I'm wondering about, I'm so interested in all those immigrants that you're talking about in New York. Uh, don't they try hard to be comfortable in their adopted country? Don't they try to shed their their cultures from back home on the most part? When my grandparents came to this country, for example, they left it behind. Uh, they they didn't want to talk about it, and so on. And so I think people are making a terrific emotional effort. Certainly, my grandparents did, to become part of a different emotional community. Perhaps the emotional community of other immigrants from that same area in New York. That would be an easier transition. I doubt you could move from one emotional community directly into one that completely different, go from a gay bar into a monastery. Maybe it's possible, But then how comfortable were you in the gay bar? Probably a lot of you was feeling something is wrong here, that you would move. I don't know. I don't know,
Mm,
but this is worth the research. There's so much to be done if you're thinking
mm,
in terms of emotional communities. So much, and since you're an educator and you're interested in what are the implications of this for teaching, which I think you are, yes. Uh,
100%.
I am currently, I have finished with a co-author, Riccardo Cristiani, a book on what is the history of emotions, in which we have examples of the kind of research you could do if you want to follow up on emotional communities, the notion of emotionology, the notion of conflicting conceptualizations. All of these things are possible for students to work on, to think about, to apply to their own era, their own cultures, and so on. So our book is going to come out, I don't know, 2006, 26 maybe,
26.
and it will be student friendly. And reader friendly because it isn't just students in formal classrooms that want to be thinking about the emotions. You're just ordinary person on the street thinks a lot about emotions, his emotions, her emotions.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that that is one, I think typically when people think about different communities or cultures, it's fascinating that emotions doesn't come first. Emotions isn't something to think about. It's like, okay, I want to learn about what type of food they eat. I want to learn about what type of clothes they wear. But there's not because there is this assumption that everyone's experiencing the same emotions. But I think this kind of concept also allows you to realize the emotional landscape of different communities are so different that to understand someone means to also understand that, not just their cultures and practices, not just the things that they do, but the things that they feel, which I feel like
Oh,
is a phenomenal way to put it because it actually adds an extra layer of curiosity and fascination by another person.
exactly. And also, you need to ask, why are these the foods that they eat? Why are these the practices that they have? Why are these the nature of the families that they create? And there are, of course, people, for example, Laila Abu Lugod has done this sort of thing with Bedouin uh, women. She's looked at their emotional. She's an anthropologist. She's looked at the emotions of these women as expressed in their culture as a way to get at a lot of underlying things that explain that culture rather than just describe it.
Mhm. I'm just writing all this down. I mean, in terms of the applications for education,
Yes.
or I'm curious, even in your own life, I mean, how do you feel like your research has impacted the way you interact with your friends, your family, just the people in your life? Do you feel like it changed some of that?
Yes, I feel like I'm in absolute opposition to Elon Musk when he says that the sin of Western civilization is empathy, because I think that looking at emotional communities has allowed me, I hope, to be more empathetic, to not feel what other people are feeling, for I can never do that. I hardly know what I'm feeling, but to be open to the thought that they have feelings, that they manipulate those feelings, that they're trying to manipulate my feelings, just to be open to all of that and not be afraid.
Hmm. And I think this is perhaps I don't know. I mean, there's just so much that can be done in this space. I think I went to this conference and I really liked something they did. They had this giant emotional wheel. And it's a pretty cool because it starts with those six that you were talking about, but every layer out, it actually adds like a bunch. So at the farthest layer, I think you might even have close to 100 different emotions on this wheel. And a lot of those words are not even words that I use regularly. So it was even nice to see 100 different words to describe my emotions. And what they did was at the start of every day, or just throughout however you're feeling, you had these like little cute little stones that they had. Just place them wherever, whatever you're feeling that morning. And it was so cool. I think there was a certain community, there was about 120 people at this thing, a certain communal feeling that happened when you saw a lot of people also feeling similar things that you were feeling. You're like, oh, it's not actually such a bad thing that I'm feeling this. It's totally normal. And a lot of people are feeling this. And I really liked that because one, it gave you so many more words to kind of even ask yourself, what am I feeling? Rather than just those six. And then two, it made you realize a lot of us are actually feeling these things similarly. And no matter what you're going through, I think when you're able to actually say it out loud, you find a lot of other people who are going through the same thing. And I think it at least, at the very least, it reduces the isolation that can sometimes come from fear, from pain, from struggling, from anxiety, whatever. And I think to me, that is the part that I think talking about these things can solve. I mean, it allows you to create such a deeper connection and community with people rather than had you had to always present yourself as this very stoic individual.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
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 But I want to say thank you so much for this conversation. I mean, truly, this was a absolute pleasure, and I really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun and I enjoy talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to say thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Season 10 is having so many amazing conversations about feelings, passion, meaning, awe. And so I hope you're enjoying. And as per usual, stay re educated.